हाय एवरीवन, मैं हूँ आंचल पाठक और 5 पैसा में आपका स्वागत है। मैं हमारी ऑडियंस को एक बिग थैंक यू बोलना चाहूँगी हमारे वेबिनार को जॉइन करने के लिए। इस सीरीज़ में हम इंडिया के सबसे एस्टेब्लिश स्टार्टअप के फाउंडर से बातचीत करेंगे और हम जानेंगे कि एक एंटरप्रेन्योर या फाउंडर बनने के लिए आपको किस टाइप का माइंडसेट रखना चाहिए, आपको कैसे स्ट्रगल्स फेस करने पड़ते हैं और कैसे डिसीजंस आपको लेने पड़ते हैं। तो चलिए मैं अपने गेस्ट को इंट्रोड्यूस करती हूँ। मुझे आज जॉइन कर रहे हैं शिवम सिंगला, फाउंडर लीगैलिटी। शिवम नेशनल लॉ स्कूल के ग्रेजुएट है और उन्होंने बहुत ही यंग एज में अपनी एंटरप्रेन्योरियल जर्नी स्टार्ट की है। शिवम को फोर्ब्स 30 अंडर 30 की लिस्ट में एक स्पेशल मेंशन भी मिला है। और हम लीगैलिटी की बात करें तो ये एक सॉफ्टवेयर सॉल्यूशन है जो ई साइनिंग और ई स्टैंपिंग हैसल फ्री बनाती है और बिजनेस का जो पेपर वर्क फ्लो है वो इजी करता है। Thank you so much, Shivam, for taking out your time and joining us today on this webinar. I'm sure the audience is quite excited to know about your journey. How are you feeling today? How are things?
Feeling great, Anchal, and thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, but let me start with my questions. सबसे पहले ये बात करते हैं that you are a lawyer by education और आपकी entrepreneurial ambition लेकिन बहुत ही early age से थी. So what drove you to start something of your own? Like despite going through law school, which is quite, I'm assuming that it's not easy to get in and it's quite a tough profession, and then you sort of shifted to a more entrepreneurial mindset. So what was the inspiration behind that?
Right. So I think right from my childhood itself, I had some of entrepreneurs around me. Whenever I used to see big business folks being able to create a lot of impact and work and live with a lot of freedom, that always used to excite me. So even when I got into law school, that was always at the back of my head that entrepreneurship is something really exciting. But I think once I started to get a little more exposure to law as a field, I realized that legal processes and everything related to law is so complicated and inefficient that it's not something very exciting to be in. And this was the phase when the startup ecosystem in India was really booming, right? So I got exposed to the startup ecosystem early. I was in Bangalore, and this was the time when Flipkart and all were just booming in. So I got exposed to that, and I realized that a lot of companies are using technology to disrupt legacy industries and create a lot of impact. So I think that was the moment that I became convinced that okay, maybe entrepreneurship is the route that I need and want to take.
Right. So why legality specifically? What was the inspiration behind the product? आपने mention किया है कि anything related to law, signing documents काफी difficult था, but can you tell us a little more about the thought process behind this?
Right. So once we started looking at the problems around legal processes in the economy, we realized that documentation is everywhere, right? Across the economy, no matter what kind of business it is, what scale it is at, what sector it plays, and even within a business across different processes, there is documentation, right? So as a business, when you acquire a customer, you execute some documentation. When you onboard a vendor, you execute some documentation. When you onboard an employee, you execute documentation for finance, legal, compliance matters. Also, there's a lot of documentation involved. And we realized that all of that was very, very physical, very, very inefficient when we started. And we realized that there was a big governmental intention to take the economy digital, and there were initiatives and like Aadhaar and all, which were just coming up at that time in the modern format it is in today. So that's when we realized that maybe this is the right moment to solve this universal problem of documentation, because both as a business and a customer, all of us regularly are pained by the fact that to do some basic stuff, also we need to move so much paper and just spend so much time and energy on a very unproductive things. So that was the idea that we wanted to introduce legality as a platform which Indian businesses could use to basically digitize and automate their entire documentation processes, saving a lot of time, energy, and in their own internal processes, and also making the customer experience far more superior.
Right. And how easy or difficult was it to convince your investors about this product, considering that you're a young team? So, did you have any crisis in terms of that we have a great product, like in people not having faith in you because perhaps they thought that you were too young to take up this venture?
Right. I think in the early days it was definitely very, very hard, because when you start as a young founder, you have to prove a lot more. You don't have that credibility. It's really, really hard to build that credibility very, very fast. And for someone to put their money into you practically, that's very, very hard thing to do. So I think we also went through that journey where in the first 2 3 years it was, we knew that we had something. We People were convinced that okay, that's a problem, but it was not that easy to convince investors that we are the right people to do it, and we could actually make it happen, because we had no solid long track record to back us. But I think ultimately that helps, that builds a lot of resistance, a lot of consistency, and lot of just ability to continue fighting. So yeah.
Right, that sounds quite inspirational. In fact, not giving up. Can you tell us where did the initial funding for Legality come from?
Right. So for the first 2 3 years, I borrowed some money from my family. That was the initial uh, money that I used to fund the initial expenses. Obviously, we were very, very lean. We were barely spending, and spending only on the very, very basic things. But I think that was the first, absolute first source. And obviously, once we had some traction, we raised our angel round, which helped us really become a little more easy with expenses and money.
Right. So let's talk about the startup world in general. बहुत glamour associated है, and every time कुछ if you achieve something new, तो there's a lot of media hype. आपको भी Forbes की list में, the very coveted Forbes list, you've gotten a special mention. So does that change the perception around you and your business? Have you felt that there's a shift? Do you now feel that there is a lot more responsibility, a lot more eyes on you at this point of time? Once these things take off, or is it more or less the same? How do you handle the glamour and the fame around being a founder?
Right. So I think the glamour, the fame, is only a feel good factor. Ultimately, in a business, you are in the market, and the market is brutal, right? And the market only cares about you if you can solve their problems. Obviously, there is in sometimes they may care about who's the one solving their problem, but at the end of the day, the market, the customers want to ensure that their problem gets solved in the most efficient way, right? So at the end of the day, all these, as I said, all these lists, fame, glamour is just a feel good factor. But ultimately, if your success is still dependent upon whether you can solve the right problems for the market, and the market values that instead of which list are you featured on.
Right. So you have to keep very level-headed no matter how much fame you achieve, definitely, and keep pushing on to reach your goals. You experimented a lot with your career in the beginning. You even tried your hand at journalism. So is there any interesting insight that you took away from these tips?
I think definitely doing a lot of very different things builds a uh, very different kinds of perspective into you, right? So that makes you appreciate the complexities and nuances of very interconnected field, but also see and realize how multiple such different fields come together to achieve a single objective, right? And I think that becomes very important as a founder, because within the company also it's always multiple departments with very, very different skill sets required, with very different problems and nuances that work together to achieve the business goal. But and it really helps that you can switch from one context to the other context very very quickly and understand and appreciate the nuances and all of them, and because that really helps you uh, understand everything that it takes to achieve the objective. So I think my initial experience in doing a lot of different things also helped me in that goal of being a stronger generalist, and that really helped me in my early days.
Right. And what would you say has been the most difficult part about your entrepreneurial journey? Something that perhaps you could even like to change if you could, like go back into the past and change it maybe.
Right. So I would say that the most difficult part of the journey has been the gestation period of the effort that you put in and the time that it takes for the results to come up. Right. Because especially in our journey, we have been in a B2B space where anything that we do, it's not that we do something today and immediately tomorrow we can see the results. We have to be, uh, it takes for the effort we start putting in today. Eventually impacts in terms of results a few months down the line, a few quarters down the line, and even in cases years down the line. So when you are doing it, you really need to be convinced that you are doing the right thing, because there's no way of knowing immediately that whether you're doing the right thing, you're putting the effort in the right places. So I think that uncertainty of whether you are doing the right thing and the time period that it takes for your efforts to start showing results, and within that time period also you have to consistently do it, right? Like whatever you're doing. So I think that's been the hardest part, just the time that it takes for your efforts to uh, give results.
Right. Patience is definitely a key factor here. And one thing that I would really want to ask you is that I've come across a lot of entrepreneurs who've spent their 20s and also their mid 30s in sort of building themselves up, trying to learn in different industries. Obviously something similar to what you did in the beginning, but their stints are much longer. They've put in a decade or two in getting to know how to go about a business and then started something on their own. What do you have to say about young entrepreneurs like yourself, people who have similar ambitions to you right out of college, maybe after 1 or 2 years of work ex, wanting to build something of their own? What advice would you give them?
Right. So I think it's to start a venture early in your life, in your 20s. I think it's both a great thing and a very bad thing, because I think on the great part, it's the fact that you don't have a lot of baggage and you don't have a lot of responsibilities and you don't have a lot of expectations on you. Even if you fail, no one cares, and you can look at a lot of things from a fresh perspective. So I think those are the great parts, which make it, in a way, make it really, really easy. Because at the end of the day, even if it fails, you don't have a lot to lose, right? But on the bad side, I think there's it in your 20s. It takes a lot of mind space, a lot of effort, which and it takes you onto an entirely different life journey, which can sometimes take a huge toll on your uh, on on your personal life, on your health, on your, like, how you, like, what how much free time you get, and obviously the fact that it takes a lot of time. I, I think there's obviously an advantage if you do it later, because you know what corporations are, you know how they work, you have a lot of exposure to things. So it obviously, when starting early, you think you know a lot, but in actuality, there's a lot you don't know. So it takes that initial period to reach that stage where you are know a lot of things. That also takes time. So that's why I say there's both good parts and bad parts. But I think it's definitely something very exciting to do, despite the challenges, to do something like this in our 20s.
That's a really great and refreshing perspective where you are showing both the black and the white perspectives of being a young entrepreneur. I think that's quite honest. Speaking of not having personal time and putting everything into your business, what about the work life balance? थोड़ा redundant हो गया है ये question, but फिर भी मैं पूछना चाहूंगी आपसे, how do you manage a work life balance? Do you have any hobbies that you indulge in? What do you do in your free time?
Right. So I think work-life balance definitely takes a toll if you are really, really in it. And I think that's been the case for me as well. Not that I don't like it. I think I've over the last few years, more than half a decade, I've now grown up to actually like the work-life balance I have, which is more work and less of other things. But I think it's not impossible to maintain a healthy balance. You can still just, if you are a little disciplined, if you're organized, and if you can draw the right boundaries, I think it's still possible for you to get the best of both worlds. Yeah.
Right. And what can you tell us about the future of legality? Any big plans that you would like to mention? You are mostly a B2B business, but do you have anything planned directly for the common man?
So we are trying to build legality as a platform, as a single one-stop document infrastructure platform, where whenever any business needs and wants to has any problem related to documentation or any process related to documentation, they can come to the legality platform and solve that problem. And I think in that process by itself, the end consumer gets directly impacted, because if you think about it from an end consumer and normal citizen perspective, some of the hardest times we have in our lives is when we have to do bank documentation or do some governmental documentation or do similar stuff, right? So I think in a lot of day-to-day affairs for the end, our work directly impacts the end customers, because even though we may be serving the bank, but the bank is using our technology to ease the life of their customers and give their services to the end customers in a much more seamless manner, when the customers don't have to travel from here and there, or they don't have to wait a lot of for a long time.
Right, and I'm sure a lot of people will be thankful for your work since you made their lives much easier through your platform. Before we close the interview, and definitely you've provided us with a great perspective of what it's like to be a young entrepreneur. But before we close the interview, there's a small rapid fire round that we would like to play with you. Are you ready for it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, here goes. So number one, three entrepreneurs who inspire you.
Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Mukesh Ambani.
Right, impressive list. Indoors or outdoors?
I think indoors when I'm tired or have less energy, and outdoors when I'm more energetic.
Okay, reading or Netflix?
I think reading for learning and Netflix for fun.
Sounds good. Three qualities that an entrepreneur should have.
I think ability to see the future, not giving up, and being humble.
Right. So, the most underrated thing about being a founder.
I think that effort and the patience that it takes to get any meaningful results.
Right. And what's the most overrated thing about being a founder?
Maybe the glamour.
Well, that's good to know. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Shivam, once again for giving us your time. And like I said, you've given a very fresh and honest perspective to being a founder, especially someone as young as you. All the best for the future and all the best for all your big plans for legality. We hope to catch up with you soon.
Thank you, Anshul.